Hello, testing. Wow, okay, great. We've got a great turnout to talk about conviction. A new chapter, a new year in Bittensor. I like to think that one of the things that defines Bittensor from the very beginning is that we've always rolled with the punches. The concept of an exploit is the idea that you learn from where the miners hit you. Hey, what did they teach me about the incentives? The constant pen testing that comes from us building mechanisms in permissionless settings where anybody can contribute and anybody compete teaches us about how to build really functioning markets. That's what we're doing here. And it's a testament to how far we want to go and how difficult this problem is and how big of a problem this is that we're trying to solve, how we continue to get tested and how big those tests are. We're not just playing at the level of can we incentivize inference anymore. We're at the level of can we incentivize a functioning federation of artificial intelligence companies? Can we incentivize the cohesion of an ecosystem to create AGI inside of? And it's no wonder that we're at the level of talking about governance at the subnet level, at the chain level, very hard problems. It's one thing to just centralize a single transactional network where there's not much happening. It's an entirely different problem to incentivize 128 teams building 128 different projects, ranging from compute to data collection to incentivization of training machine learning models while building functioning Web 2 products that people buy and sell. It's a much harder problem to build all of this. And we need to focus on some of the hardest problems in this space, problems that no one has ever solved before. We get a lot of backlash for having our first rug, a significant rug in the Bittensor ecosystem. But which economy out there, which project in Web3 has not had this happen? But the difference between us and I think is everyone else is that we're expected to solve this problem, and no one else is expected to solve this problem. No one else has said that they can solve this problem. No one seems to care. Ethereum happens every day. Solana happens every day. Ton happens every day. There's rugging and there's no regard for building actual solutions to these problems that protect investors, but we're going to try to solve that problem because we're going to roll with the punches, because we learn from exploits. And that's what we've been doing from the very beginning. And every upgrade to the Bittensor protocol has been like this. From the first exploit of Subnet 1, from the issues with the root network to the hack that led to us decentralizing into Latent and other companies running different versions of our infrastructure. We learn from this, we build from it, we become better, and we grow exponentially from them. This one, I think, is telling us that we need to work on the governance at the level of the subnets to let investors have more control of the projects that they're investing in. And a bit of a story, interesting, Sam and I have a bit of a history. I hired him personally into OTF. He was the head of blockchain. He's this engineer who does not sleep, quite manic person, very good developer, who worked with me. And just before he left OTF, we were actually working on the beginnings of Dynamic Tau. And we wanted to solve this problem of what happens in the long term for the subnets themselves. We're building decentralization into the core chain, but how do we build token ownership at the level of the subnet? And our plan was to build a lock-based conviction system. The idea being that the tokens that you lock, in addition to what you stake, your stake that you lock, you can vote with this. You can prove that you care and make the concept of the subnet owner something that is mutable. Everything in Bittensor that is incentivized, with the exception to the transaction fees on the chain currently, which is changing very, very, very quickly, and the subnet owner is mutable. Validation incentives are mutable. Minor emissions are mutable, they change. The subnets themselves are mutable, they're competitive. If you want to get incentive on Bittensor, if you want to get paid on Bittensor, you have to work. But the owner key is not. It's fixed. It's immutable. And it has always been something that I thought we should integrate into competition in some way. The original DTAO release actually included locked-based incentives, something we called lion share subnet ownership. But it was not released, and it was not released specifically because we wanted to give teams more time to adapt to the complexities of dynamic TAO. It was going to be a lot to jump into. They went from a system of no token ownership whatsoever, pure TAO-based emission flow, root network game, to one where there was a liquid token, investors, outward promotion, et cetera, et cetera. We didn't want to jump on them with an additional question about how they were going to run this in a system where there was also locking. Fast forward a year, and almost on just a couple of months after the anniversary of dynamic TAO, we see the first issues with not having this immutability, not having mutability. Obviously, what happened here was devastating to myself personally. On a personal level, it was terrible to be betrayed like that by somebody that I had helped substantially in the ecosystem. But that's not the purpose of this conversation. We have to imagine that anything that happens to us can happen again. And we need to think about how we can build mechanisms that allow us to confront those problems today, but also in the future going forward. The idea is simply, you don't own a subnet unless you have something at risk. And the way to measure that is to introduce a completely new dimension of stake. The stake is how much you own. Incentive is how much you work. Stake times time is your conviction. It's how much you own into the future. What is holding you into the network? And if we had had this mechanism in place, something like this would have been visible. The purpose of this mechanism is not to make it impossible for subnet owners to raise capital. The purpose of this mechanism is not to burden teams with the inability to use their tokens and sell them and to fund themselves, or to reach investment or get investment from investors. The purpose of this mechanism is to build transparency, or build a tooling or a primitive through which people can provably cryptographically show conviction and ownership of their subnets. It's about building up this primitive so that we can build all sorts of other interesting things on top of it, like liquid ownership of subnets, and give investors a new tool they can use to evaluate, and subnet owners a tool to use to signal good behavior. Hey, look, I want to lock this for a long period of time. I'm here for the long run. If we can do this, I think that we can actually solve one of these problems in cryptocurrency, in Web3, that has not been solved ever. No one has done this because I don't think anyone really has thought about doing it. There's no platform that has sought to build a governing system where investors can be safe. In fact, in the last couple of years in crypto has been going the other direction. Let's go directly to let's lean into the degeneracy with pumped up fun. Let's lean into the bullshit instead of going, hey, how do we solve this problem properly? And I think that we have the technology. We have to do this in a way that is not manual. We don't have the tools available to us, the classic governmental systems around us have used all through time to solve this problem. In standard companies, there's rules. If you do what Sam did, you go to jail, and he may still go to jail, but it's a very arduous process to do that, whereas it would be very clear legal argument in the case of a company that existed, let's say, in the jurisdiction of the United States or Canada or elsewhere. But these processes are very slow, they're very expensive, they're not very transparent, and they're basically only open to people that have money to play them. The whole idea of working with cryptographic primitives like we're using here on Bittensor is to build new ways of solving these problems that are transparent and liquid and agentic and futuristic and fast-moving. If we can get this right, and I believe we will, we can make it impossible for people to perform this type of behavior, and there doesn't need to be an overarching authority that we can appeal to. It truly can be, you can not have that risk. You can see how much lock stake there is in a subnet. You can see that the owners can't move that. You can see that they can't rug. You're protected. It's not, trust that there's a government that will fix it. It is literally trust in the cryptographic primitives that we build to allow people to showcase how much they have trusted in you as an investor. So the idea is very simple. The plan is we build this primitive, conviction, the ability for people to lock stake. We're not going to force this upon subnet owners. And I know that there's been a lot of conversation in the chats about how this is going to work, and I'll give you guys a bit of a rundown of our plan for rolling this out in a way that I think will be people will be happy about. So first of all, we're just going to build the mechanism. We're going to allow people to lock stake. It's going to be a mute mechanism on the chain, means you don't need to use it. But some people, I imagine, will. I believe that before we even build any hierarchical mechanisms onto the chain, I believe that the culture of Bittensor will use this tooling to incentivize and attract investment into subnets. Hey, look, I am here for the long run, and we don't even need to build anything else than just the locking. I think the teams here will do that. But our goal here is to also bring this into the network as a way of solving long-term problems that are created by, say, what happened with Sam. Somebody just gets up and leaves, rugs their investors, steals from people, and then forevermore can continually take 18% from the pool and drain the liquidity from that pool. That shouldn't be allowed on Bittensor. That shouldn't be allowed. We shouldn't allow people to do that. Clearly, everyone can feel that it's ethically incorrect. And our plan is to introduce this locking mechanism, the ability to lock stake, and then to selectively turn these mechanisms on for some subnets, specifically 3, 39, and 81, and to put them to test for the purpose of voting, people locking their stake, and choosing who the owner key will be. If we can achieve this effectively, I think we can regain those subnets, protect these investors, and showcase that we can take back control in a fair governmental system from the mechanistic level of Bittensor. It's not a pseudo key change ownership. That's wrong. We should use this opportunity to build the mechanisms that we should have had in place in order to protect investors, and to use and tools that we should have in place for all subnets, and then use this as an example to test that functionally. So we will turn this locking mechanism on. We will introduce the tooling that allows it to be used to control the owner key of a subnet. And I just want to put an asterisk here. There are mechanisms running on 3 and 39 now. There are other ways that we can take control of subnets as a community, and that's done through the validators. That is liquid, and I'll talk about that, how that's important in a second. We will turn this on for select subnets, test the mechanism, showcase people with this organically growing group of people using locking, and then slowly we will turn it on for most subnets in Bittensor, only those that are mature. We're not going to turn this on initially for subnets. This simply just doesn't make sense for a new subnet to come in with zero liquidity and have to deal with the complexities of Bittensor and then at the same time risk having their subnet taken away. This is for mature subnets that have built a large stake of investors and that have a large amount of tau. And another aspect to this design is that anybody can lock stake to the owner. This isn't just the owner needs to do everything themselves. This is about stakeholders voting with their conviction towards the people that they believe can run the subnet properly. They get to pick the name. The owners get to set the hyperparameters. They are the equilibrium shelling point of a subnet. But ultimately, they're not the only people in control. And they should be run in this distributed setting and with a distributed mechanism. And so our long-term goal is to turn this on fully for subnets on Bittensor. And I do believe this will actually be, people are always negative with new changes. They think it's scary. What is this going to mean? But I recommend that people follow the process along and see how we organically solve this problem. It's not going to be all at once. It's not going to be tomorrow that we wake up and all of a sudden your subnet is owned by somebody else. In fact, we're building the mechanisms in place so that you can't do that, right? So the owners have an advantage. You will be able to see if somebody is locking and staking to your subnet, and you will be able to counter that. You will be able to garner your community. Hey, lock with me. It's not immediate as well. You build up that conviction over time. It's not instantaneous. It can't be a flash attack. And also, on top of that, the economics don't even make sense for attacking a subnet like this. If somebody attacks your subnet and they're not the rightful owners and none of the community agrees, they can always just sell and the other team is locked. So the economics are not there in place for them to. It doesn't make much economic sense to do this. And even then, if a malicious team were to take over your subnet, the validators do not need to switch stake, which means that your mechanism can still run just as normal. And you can take your time slowly to regain your control of the subnet. It's only really truly for the case where there is quite literally a malicious owner that has gone against the token holders of the subnet. So they have the ability to, through conviction, take back control of these the tau holders, the holdings that are theirs, and regain sovereignty in the subnet that is partially theirs. That's the end goal. And we're going to move in this direction slowly. And I think that it's exciting. It seems like, hey, governance, is that really what we need to do in terms of technology? But every single time there's been an innovation like this on Bittensor, we see that it actually just elicits more contribution and more ownership on part of the owners and the miners and also the stakers in their ecosystem. So this will turn into something that turns into an organic revolution and a renaissance for, I'm sure, the larger subnets on Bittensor. So I'm not here to present the core design. We have one. It's not going to be presented on the screen. We're obviously going to put that through the bit proposal. We will carry forward in the normal process for OTF to make this happen. But we will regain these subnets and we will regain control over all of them ultimately. So yeah, okay. That's what I had to talk about today. But I think that it's also important that we answer some questions and clear the air about some other things that have happened in the ecosystem. So I'm just going to do an AMA now. So from Boromir, wouldn't conviction contradict the net flow design? No, not at all. So it doesn't affect that. It's simply the ability for somebody to stake into a subnet and lock those funds. So that just means they don't move. Erhu says, I remember we used to have global stake versus local stake. Is there a similar thing for global conviction versus local conviction? That's a very good question. We're just talking about local conviction because we're talking about subnet tokens, alpha tokens. This is not a voting mechanism at the abstract level, the tau level, the root level for Bittensor, although that is also possible. And I believe that we can use this mechanism for other governmental systems at that level as well. And someone says that as a top holder of Templar, will you lock all of your alpha? Yes, I'm going to lock all of my alpha. And I'm going to lock it with a team that wants to take over this mission. And I think that we're going to find that team from the miners that really made this training run great in the first place. People like Clarence and Noah and Weiji, other people that have been mining in those subnets for a long time that have tokens as well that will participate in that. And I want to see that happen organically. Bormer, you say, is conviction just an anti-rug measure? And it's not just an anti-rug measure. It's also an ownership measure. It's also token rights measure. It gives more value to the alpha tokens because it allows investors to truly control that brand, that slot, the brand behind the slot, the miner community, the mechanism. If they're wrong, if they kick out the team and the team actually had all the value, the miners will go with them. This is all just cryptographic. Sammy says, will be worth mentioning how Shoots is basically doing this right now. Yes, Shoots is already doing this. Top Subnet on Bittensor is already doing this and functioning just fine. Another point to be made here to teams that are worried about how do I fund this? The way that you lock the tokens is you basically say there's a duration. Let's say like I'm locking 1,000 alpha for a duration of a year, so 365 days. Over that period of time, there's a linear unlocking. So you lock your 1,000, and then you linearly unlock it over the 365 days. So you can sell slowly over that period of time. Or if you want to, you can sell it. If you're looking for an OTC deal, which I recommend for most teams, is you just simply say the duration, I will deliver on the duration. I'm locking for this period of time. At the end of it, I will deliver it, which allows teams to still fund and honestly to fund in the proper way, which I recommend that they do that. It's the same with the OTF, also funded by selling tokens that we hadn't mined yet. We said, hey, we think we're gonna mine these tokens in a couple of years, or we'll deliver them in this much time, and that's how we were able to fund ourselves. Can we make it so only locked stakers get yield? That's an interesting question, Sebi. That's not in the current design. It changes things a lot. It's an interesting idea, but it will make it so that we really have to see how the locking dynamics play out, because there may not be enough locked stake to facilitate human consensus. Miners can also lock their alpha. Could you just transfer locked stake? No, you can't, right? So locked stake would not allow the transfer function. Can locked tokens be transferred? Same for murder? No. Answer is no. What happens when the subnet reg cost? Will it be a burn cost? Sorry, what happens with the subnet reg cost? Will it be a burn cost? Sorry, I'm not sure what that question is, Borg, unfortunately. Const, do you have plans to say anything about the possible solution regarding the covenant cold keys? Yeah, so this mechanism is a solution to that problem. In the meantime, we are running functioning mechanisms on those subnets because we were able to get the validators to vote and bring the mechanisms back to life on those subnets. But there's still 18% going to the old team. This will allow us to have a token vote on those subnets where people can say, hey, look, I want to lock the future of subnet 3 on Bittensor. And they can do that. We can bring the cold key and the ownership to a new team that's going to functionally bring that subnet back to life and organize that community. Bitcoin said, what's your view on community-led continuations of rugged subnets? I forked Basilica, have a validator, might have run in 39, and am involved in the incentive mechanism. I'm very much in favor of this, organic movement of the control and running of these subnets. But ultimately, the decision will be made by token voting through this mechanism. In the meantime, it's more of a validator-based mechanism. How do the validators choose to CK and child key across so you can run? There's a bit of a tug of war there in terms of power, but eventually, once we have the proper token vote, they can wrestle back control. Subnet reg cost could be a conviction lock then, right? That's a good point, Flow Sniper. I do believe that the subnet owners will be highly incentivized to lock some amount of their alpha immediately. So we don't need to enforce that. When one team rugs in the new system, how would that impact the rest of the teams? when one team rugs in the new system, how would that impact the rest of the teams? My hope is that, and this is what I was mentioning in terms of building another primitive, is that as a community, we use this as a signal for, hey, this is a team that is trying to build trust. And they're doing it in a verifiable way. So will we see a situation where a subnet that has a high price and a lot of investors rug like this? I think it will be impossible if we as a community can build an ecology where we don't incentivize that type of behavior. RV Crypto says owners already have a lot on their plate. How much extra complexity is this going to bring? You know, RV is a good question. Like, I think there's two ways that we're gonna confront that. The first one is that a lot of the teams that are still here from the early DTAO days, the ones that are mature subnets, you know, more than a year old, I think that they can functionally deal with this amount of complexity. They have a fair amount of their token. This mechanism will have time to mature. Initially, it's not going to be turned on for them immediately. The lock cost will be something that becomes a primitive. You'll see it in the CLI. We're going to have it on the explorers before it ever becomes functional as something we need to think about. I think that we can cross this bridge in the same way that we've crossed much you know, more difficult rivers before. Const, we already have the dereg mechanism. Conviction could trigger this. Why the focus on change of ownership? The dereg mechanism is to get rid of subnets that are underperforming or unable to attract attention inside Bittensor. The token voting mechanism is just to protect investors at the high end of Bittensor. Basically to stop what happened just last week. Right? Or in the event of something like that happening, that token holders can come in and regain control and also see before it happens. There's a lot of ways that this mechanism protects us in that dimension. Rookie question from Samwise: what are some ways an individual can interact with the Bittensor network with a minimal XP and tools like a decent laptop? Talk to other miners. It really depends on the mechanism. Can part of the 18% owner emission go directly to being locked? Yes, I mean, we can do this type of manual locking, but you know, ultimately, most owners will probably just do it themselves, and they can build the tools they want. Can users delegate conviction to others? Yes, exactly, T-Slice. So if you're a subnet and you have a team of 10 people and you all have stake, you can all lock conviction to one key. If there's miners in your ecosystem that believe in what you're building, they can lock to you. And if they build large stakes in your network and you're not functioning as an owner and they want to move away from you, they can also do that. But that would take time. Will there be immunity period for newly registered subnets? Exactly. So this is going to be for mature subnets where there is a functioning community around them already. There's miners. The team has locked, and they can lock a substantial amount of their tokens. So any attack would really require a substantial investment in the token. How about the amount of alpha at the beginning and then blah, blah, blah. Okay. What are the expected threshold locks and measures against any hostile subnet takeovers? Yeah, this is everyone thinks this way, and it's a really good question. So the specific equation, I won't show on my screen, but we will definitely be releasing it very soon. Your conviction is the amount you stake times time. And the amount that you lock is unlocked on a linear curve. So if you staked 1,000 tau, 1,000 alpha for 10 days, you would have all of it free after 10 days, and you'd have all of it locked on the first instant, and halfway in that period of time, you'd have half of it free. So if you locked 1,000, halfway through, you'd have 500 of it. Your conviction is effectively the area under that curve remaining. So at the very beginning, you have the highest amount of conviction, and halfway you have midpoint, and at the very end, you have very little conviction. The value that we use to determine the owner of the subnet is not the conviction, because that's instantaneously large. You just stake a large amount and get a high conviction, and then that gets used to overthrow the subnet. Instead, it's somewhat like a weighted average between how much is remaining in your conviction and how much you've already put in. So that the maximum amount of your conviction score is actually at asymptotes and it reaches its zenith at the very middle of that point. I can send some specific equations. So if someone were to lock a substantial amount of alpha for a year and get a very large conviction score, you would see that coming and it wouldn't reach its highest point until halfway through the amount of time that the tokens have been locked. This allows an owner to react, it allows investors to react, it allows everybody to react and relock or organize themselves so that it doesn't happen instantaneously in a way that is not possible for people to react to. Why not use Liam instead of 39? That's a question for Polaris. Have you run simulations on the cost of hostile takeover versus registration? No, we haven't actually run any simulations on that von Bismarck. I'd be happy to know what simulation you'd like to know. Ultimately, you can imagine what the simulation is. The output of that simulation is going to say that there's some economic cost and risk implied by trying to take over a subnet, because quite literally you cannot get out, and it measures how much you can't get out. So if you take over a subnet and you're going to destroy a subnet, you're putting yourself substantially at risk, unless they have put nothing at risk. Will there be a mechanism that allows owners to lock from emissions directly, let's say 30% of owner emissions? This way, every block locks a share of the alpha to the treasury lock. That's a great idea, Berzek. Yeah, it's a great idea. We'll try to do that. How do you solve capital raise, liquidity requirements to build and run business, reduced flow into the network as a result of liquidity requirements, collusion against owners? I answered this earlier, and a lot of people are worried about this, but I don't think that they need to be worried about this, because all you have to do as a subnet owner is take the conviction and project it into the future and see how much you have available at any point in time, and sell OTC deals which say that I'm going to deliver these tokens at that duration, which is a standard contract. It's basically safe access to future tokens. If you're going to say, hey, I need funding now, but I will deliver these tokens in the future, you basically are asking the investors to have some conviction in what you're building as well, instead of them being able to sell it automatically. At the same time, you could earmark these tokens as already sold and put that in a contract as well. If a team wants to leave, can they trigger voluntary deregistration and have their stake bought out? So we don't have voluntary deregistration right now, and the reason we don't have that is because specifically that could drastically hurt investors if a forced deregistration occurred, and we don't want this to be used in a malicious way. Subnets aren't companies. 100% true. How do we anticipate this playing out with 29 and 104? I'm not exactly sure. I think in those subnets cases, this doesn't solve that problem. They have no community, and there's nobody that is going to stake into those subnets and lock and take them over. Likely not. I think it would be a very risky move to do a hostile takeover. You'd have to buy a substantial amount of the token, and you have to go head to head with the current owner. And I don't believe that this mechanism is built for that, this system. That's more for our shorting mechanism that is still in the works. Thanks. I agree it's harder for new teams. I remember reading new teams having 6 months of immunity. Is that correct? Yes, exactly. It's correct. They're going to have an immunity period where this doesn't come into play for a while, so they don't have to worry about these issues. At the same time, we're also building new mechanisms to make it easier for some owners, like auto CK, and giving them an initial distribution of the token. When will the team that rugged stop getting paid? Basically, when we introduce this mechanism. Can SN owners pledge a proportion of their owner emissions to conviction or sets amount for sets amounts of time? They could. Again, I don't think it really changes the design, Flow Sniper. You can build that as a script that you run beside. You could pledge it, I suppose, but then we have 2 levels of conviction. You have conviction of pledging, which complicates the design. I don't think we really need that. What about the subnets that were registered recently? They should be considered. They won't be considered until there's an immunity period, and we're talking about older subnets that this happens for. Vex says, for newly registered subnets, Tau whales can buy alpha and end up holding more than the owner. If the owner does not have enough Tau to defend their position and a whale locks enough alpha, it feels like control of the subnet could effectively shift to that whale. That creates a serious risk. Whales could take over the project direction, sabotage the subnet, or even kill it entirely if they wanted. Let's talk about that. This is I think, people's main concern. Imagine yourself as a subnet with just a whale and a team. The whale puts an immense amount of their alpha in lock. The purpose is to sabotage and kill the subnet. Well, they're now in a position where they've put all of their economic value at risk for a very long period of time, and the subnet owners are now no longer in control. Assuming they have a community and you have people that want to follow them, they can just simply sell before this individual. This individual takes all the risk, and they can buy another subnet and bring their copyright with them. It seems like a very risky play, I think, Vex, to do that. I don't know why you would sabotage your own investment, but even still, the subnet owners are still making their 18%, and they can defend that position, unless, of course, the community inside that network doesn't agree, and they stake with the whale, supposedly, that is the malicious whale taking over the subnet. But if that's the case, are they really malicious? At the same time, even control of the subnet owner position doesn't give you ultimate control of the subnet. The validators also need to agree to shift weight, and they can validate in this way or that way. That's still their prerogative. So if this is a malicious takeover, the validators can still choose not to participate in this gaming. They can keep the mechanism running as normal, and people can try to raise capital to take over this whale or just shift to another subnet. Who makes the initial decision about which key should receive the new ownership? It's quite simple. It's just the key that has the most lock. Who makes the initial decision for actually, I'm not sure. That's quite obvious, that it's the key that has the most amount of locked. Okay, there's a lot of questions. Oh my gosh, I'm so far away. What about I'm just going to go down to the bottom. What about Ridges and Five Girl? He owns almost 2x the owner. I think Five Girl was probably in this call, and you can ask him, and he would probably tell you that it would be a very bad decision for him to kick out the owners of the team if they are in fact the right team for the job. And if he owns more than 50% of the subnet, in some sense, it's his subnet. We don't know if Five Girl is a he. What about the situation like Coldin, which is just trying to sandbag? I honestly think that this isn't a solution to the Coldin, and that's for a different conversation, a different novelty search when we're talking about the shorting mechanism for bringing in that will help us battle teams that simply game the emissions. If you lock your stake and you're not the owner, can you use that to signify conviction in the owner? Exactly. Yeah. So you can lock your stake and signify conviction with the owner. So if you're a member of that subnet, I am an investor in many of the subnets in Bittensor, and I will certainly be staking with the owners. When will the vote for a new lock mechanism take place, and when will it be implemented if it passes? Apologies if I've already covered this earlier. The lock mechanism, we're hoping that we can get in the next month. And just to get the initial designs for locking out there on the network, so people can build it into the explorers, etc., and people can play with the idea. As for the voting mechanism for subnets, we're going to take a little bit more time with that, and we're going to be smooth with that launch. Why would we want to allow whales to pool together to take over the SN slot? What if they find another team they just prefer having the slot? I think we should require 50% circulating alpha locked in conviction for the challenging key. This may simply be impossible to get 50% of the lock, and that neuters the mechanism. I think that we have to find a balance between the ability for the mechanism to work and also the protection for the teams. As I've outlined, if the majority of the teams, if the majority of the whales in the subnet have agreed that they want to take the owner team in a different direction, and that owner team disagrees with the rest of the 30% of the subnet, I think that it makes sense that they would be overruled. What will motivate subnet owners to lock it at all if they plan to rug? Great, don't lock it. And this, I think, is ultimately the point we're making, right? Teams can use this to prove cryptographically, not via podcasts and statements and channels. They can prove cryptographically that they're there for the long run. Don't trust, verify. This industry has suffered from scammers, people that claim things that are not true for forever. And it's because we haven't built the tooling to allow us to actually live true in our industry, which is that we verify, we don't trust. And we have suffered this for a very long time, and we think we can solve it like this. What if it goes to a Dutch auction instead of a takeover? I think this is some complexity, HOA that we don't necessarily need. Great. That was a lot of questions. To be clear, the owner 18% goes to the largest lock. Yes, exactly. So they take the 18%. I know code is law, but a massive incentive to not screw over your subnet could be allowing for digital signatures attached to legal contracts on chain. This creates some real world accountability that's hard for them to shrug off. Well, unfortunately, if you can find a jurisdiction where legal contracts on chain work, perhaps we could do that. But this is very difficult, and ultimately it tethers us to legal systems in particular countries, and we are an international movement. It's quite limiting to go that direction, and we therefore are limited in our ability to truly decentralize across the globe. If there is a big business competitor of a subnet, they might risk some money to kill the subnet, as it was, I believe, the case for Covenant. Would it be possible? I suppose it would be possible, but let's imagine in this case the cost that team would have to put up to achieve that. They destroy a subnet, everyone sells behind them. They've literally just lost all their money, and then the team can move to a different subnet. In fact, they've been freed, maybe, perhaps, and they have they have the ethical high ground to move to a different project and just rerun their mechanism, and people can come with them. I actually don't think it would be so devastating. It would be extremely costly for the attacker. Take 125 as an example. Barb is not the biggest owner, and the biggest holder is unknown, which has been doing some crazy alpha staking in the past. Would Barb need to wait out the whale potential lock? And the whale could earn 40%. The haircut is 40% if it were to dereg. So the whale would need to stake and lock their funds. So Barb would see this and have their ability to also compete with their 18% to protect their subnet. If they don't want to do this, this attacker can take over the subnet, but Barb can sell before them. In fact, anyone can sell before them if they believe this owner is going to destroy their own investment and they're locked and they're going to be the last to leave. And I think that ultimately that's just a bad decision on behalf of an attacker. I don't know why they would do that. Okay, conviction could be fun with agents staking, voting, locking for the best agent to run the subnet. Exactly, like the reason why we're doing this instead of manual contracts, instead of going to governments, instead of looking for contracts on chain, instead of picking a jurisdiction to be part of, is because the future of Bittensor is to move fast, and we will be governed by agents. We'll be run by agents. There will be individuals that have mine subnets with agents and run subnets, and everything can be done in a very, very cryptographic and fast-paced manner, but also trustworthy and trusted in a liquid way. We're building cryptographic governance systems that can be run by computers. Would Arbos ever burn owner alpha on his slots? That would be cool. I mean, I suppose he probably will just lock it. He only needs what is required for token usage. So an investor can be with you and against you at the same time. That's something that is questionable. Any ETA for implementing this stuff? The core design is already implemented. It's about polishing those rough edges, and I don't want to give a specific time because there's a lot of things we're working on in OpenTensor and that may come before this, but we could see it in the next month. Why also not remove subnet limits? Yeah, this is a great idea. We are thinking of ways that we can improve the scalability of Bittensor and move to more subnets. There are limits on what the chain can sustain. We already have a very large chain. There's also limits on the scalability of the emission. If we have more subnets, we suffer diluting the emission, and so we need methods that will help us along that scaling dimension as well. Is there any worry about ROS owning too many slots? I think there are people that worry about that, but I would say don't worry about that. Which is another issue we should pre-populate. Okay, yeah. What about blackmailing and racketeering to greedy? What are you talking about? Somebody who will blackmail subnet owners for kickbacks. I think that what's more likely to happen to greedy is that teams that don't behave on and token holders are upset will have other token holders lock and say, hey, we want to replace the team. You don't have any conviction here. And there will be some governance debates inside these teams, inside of these subnets. But we think that we're going to anneal this in such a way that that won't be such a risk, and it won't happen for most teams. And this is going to be something that happens really just where there's quite egregious behavior like we see on 3. How will cold key swap work? Yeah, so we still have to allow cold key swaps for the owner. What's the max lock period? I'm assuming high locks, higher conviction. That's true. Yeah, there is no determined max lock right now. It's a very good question as well, but it needs to be determined because otherwise it's gameable. But I think it will be about a year. Yeah, I mentioned that it's not instantaneous, and SN owners will be able to see it coming. So, yeah, it ramps up. It peaks. It reaches its zenith halfway through the lock period. What about the burn extrinsic to create conviction forever? Not sure. What about centralized companies with billions of dollars wanting to stifle decentralized competitors? I don't think that we're at risk of this at all. A team comes in, a $1 billion company comes in and stakes into shoots and locks all their funds and takes over the subnet. It's very unlikely. First of all, the token holders will compete against that. They will stop that from happening. Secondly, if they buy it on market, they push the prices to some absurd value. People can just, if they lose the battle and they try to destroy the subnet, they have all of their tokens locked, and other people will sell because the price has been, apparently the subnet has been destroyed. So it costs the attacker. And also, shoots is the team, it's the people, it's the miners, it's the branding, it's the idea, it's the vision, it's the community, it's the so much more of what that subnet is intangible. And the token holders that disagree with that overtaking can go somewhere else. And they have the ability to bring that with them. So it doesn't actually become an attack on Bittensor. It just really becomes a costly attack, becomes a very, very costly and ineffective attack on Bittensor. What will happen to locked stake when subnets dereg? Well, it will just be relinquished at that point. What if something changes in your underwriting of a given team you have conviction on? You're still locked. So you have to be careful about how much you lock. And that's, I think, part of the mechanism. That's the important part of the mechanism. What about the depreciation of DN? I'm not sure what DN is. Pretty much they will all make us rich before they destroy the subnet. Exactly. You get it. Great. These are great questions. What will happen to lock stake when something registers? I answered that question. It could be interesting to allow really long lock periods in this style of curve. Currently, subnets are using revenue to buy and burn. Instead, they could be locking them for up to 5 years with cliffs, long-term equity if the subnet takes off. Exactly. Yeah. As a primitive, teams can use this to build whatever they want. And this is why we're releasing it as a primitive first, so that people can use it and they can do this type of thing. What is the argument against giving higher emission APY, to, locked alpha from an investor standpoint? It ultimately just complexifies the mechanism. It changes the mechanism so that there's like yield and then like staked yield and it's complex. And I think that we don't need to introduce that right now, or really at all. In theory, a miner that dominates the subnet, maybe winner take all, can take over the subnet in the long run since 40% is greater than 82%. That's true. If they just win continuously and continuously, they could do that. It seems like this mechanism is mainly for edge cases like Covenant, which makes sense for the bigger subnets, but for a lot of small subnets, it could be relatively cheap to take over the subnet. Also for malicious actors that might be even fine with burning the money. I think modeling the effect for smaller subnets and maybe making it harder for small subnets to take over a subnet, which might be a good option. Yeah, so we intend to roll this out mostly for the larger subnets, and see how it plays out before we really go for small subnets. I don't think that we will do it for smaller subnets that are at least as a year old. Your conviction score will be top 3 subnets. No, and this is an important point. I will have a vote in those subnets, use FM, which I will then give those subnets away. Well, I will help organically give them away with the rest of the token holders. Do you think now teams will have to raise capital, external capital to fund their activity? They've always had to. If they have to raise capital to fund their activity, this doesn't really change that behavior. They can raise capital still. They just need to have a delivery that's not immediate. Would that pose a risk for subnets to just rug before the lock period would come? Well, they can't. They can't. It specifically, we measure how much is available. I think I heard Const say that there would be So is the strategy now to get mining going on 339.81 so miners obtain large alpha stakes so them can take them over? No, the actual idea for 339.81 is actually to prove that we do still as a community can run the subnets on Bittensor, and that even though this is a massive scar currently, we can still use these mechanisms to do stuff. Like on 3 right now, we're running a training mechanism. We're actually training a 1 billion parameter model on 3. 39 is getting compute infrastructure out there. And I think that we're going to organically build the equilibriums around which team is going to run and control these subnets, which eventually will be determined by token vote. Would there be a conviction immunity period for subnets where a conviction-based owner change happens or just newly registered subnets? Yes, exactly. There is going to be an immunity period. Someone says, should we wait to stake on 3? Yeah, as I've said in the channel a number of times, please don't use that market whatsoever. It's very much in a liminal space right now, and it's questionable what's going to happen. It's a bit questionable. Even if they were to stake and try to attack Nova, I honestly think that it would just be positive for Nova. Nova would just be vindicated that someone would try to take them over, and they would just move on to a different slot. All the miners would go over there, all the stakers would move over there, and it would be fine. For Subnet 3 in a world comparison, wouldn't they likely have had, say, half the alpha, 5 million USD, locked up and still be able to walk away and extract 5 million without battling the eyelid? So would it really have fixed the situation? In their case, they can walk away with 5 million. They still keep 5 million locked, and other people can. There's other holders that have more than 5 million that could lock and take over the subnet, and they would have lost 5 million. And they certainly would not have been. They would have only been able to sell the 5 million, and then additionally, the holders would have been able to sell before the next 5 million that they unlocked. Okay, now the conversation is moving in a different direction. You know, we could actually bring it to stage if people are interested to get up here and ask questions in that regard. Okay, Mog.
So, thank you. Normally, what I would do in these situations is keep quiet, listen, try and understand as much as possible, and wait until there's concrete facts in the code. But what I'm really trying to do at this stage is run simulations on every type of subnet. Subnets like Subnet 3, 64, 51 have huge amounts of treasury liquidity. And then these newer subnets that are trying to bootstrap. So I try and speak from my own experience. I look at something like video, which is constantly surfing the barrier between making enough in emissions to pay staff and not. And just seeing how this affects them. And then obviously seeing this introduced as a reaction to something that's happened, and I am just interested to how it would have played out for this scenario. So I'm sorry for dragging up the past, but it's not really the past, but how it would have played out in a number of scenarios, and that's really what I'm trying to go through in my head.
Mm-hmm. So let's take video. They could be locking a portion of their alpha and selling OTC futures on that alpha. So they could be saying, hey, look, we're going to deliver X amount at the end of this year. Pay us now, and we'll deliver then. Like that's how we funded OTF. That's what I would recommend.
But most of the OTC deals that are being proposed are at discounts with top-ups and are not particularly competitive and are not regular, and the staff need to be paid every week. So that freedom to, and actually I understand how someone like Video would do it. It's open and transparent. We would turn around and say, look, we can only afford to lock up half our alpha. And I've had this discussion with Gareth, and I've had this discussion with Dubs, who of course as subnet owners are concerned, and it changes nothing. If you're open, you're transparent, you do a good job, you say what you're doing, and you work within the bounds that you have, it's fine. But so actually, this wasn't so much about those subnets, but you said about everyone has to raise. In terms of being funded for the slot, yes. I guess for newer subnets, it's the amount of capital that's needed to take over, as we say, which is the concern.
And even in the event of the team, someone taking over a subnet like ViaDAO, right? Just imagine for a second this happening, right? This team says, hey, it's our subnet now, but the miners are like, no, and the validators are like, wait, what the hell was that? No, I disagree. And the team is like, no, I disagree, and everyone seems to disagree, and they're in there in the subnet, and they're still the validators are still just running on the other owner key. What they can just change hyperparameters. This is the extent of the damage they can do. Yeah. Go on.
I see it playing out like this. The core team, video team, want to pivot or change something, but the core miners are not happy because they've been winning and doing a good job and making lots of money. They get together, they maybe get some funding, maybe a couple of them are whales. Because video is a new subnet, the owner treasury is small, so it's not difficult for them to match or overrule what the owner is locking up. They take ownership and they continue to run the subnet in the way that they want it to be run, which of course you say, well, it doesn't have the video team, it doesn't have the advancements, but you can PR spin it, you can clone a site and say, well, we're talking kind of Bitcoin and Bitcoin Cash kind of or Ethereum Classic. We say, well, this is the way we think it should be run, this is the original way, and suddenly the team that put money into that slot, they don't have a slot anymore. So yes, video still own the IP on what they were developing, the direction. They still they have staff, but they can't pay them anymore because they're not getting any emissions. They have a website, but suddenly they need another 250 to 300K to get another slot, and they need to start all over again.
Yeah, and there's also the aspect here too, where there's the other people that have also staked into the subnet, yourself too, Mog, right? So like imagine you're a large holder in ViaDAO. Imagine this happening on the subnet. How would you react?
Well, I'm going to have to sell to show my lack of support. But whilst they make, well, yeah, I would sell because I need to get that capital out to continue to fund the team under another slot. Or because if I can't outmatch the miners and get together a consortium myself to lock up, so it now becomes he with the biggest bags controls it. I'm not so I don't want it to sound like I came on stage to be against you, and I feel like I should let other people speak. All I would like to do is play out a lot of scenarios to understand how this works and why it works, because I was not against it in the initial days when it was first proposed via detail. The mechanisms were longer running, and I think with careful thought and planning, the concept of skin in the game and conviction for subnet owners should not be a problem. But it's, as with all things on Bittensor, the scope for abuse is still great, and I wonder if it solves the problems which it's being brought in to react to. That is my only question.
Yeah, and I see why people think that's reactive. In some sense, it is, because it was stimulated by understanding how this was something that should have been in place already. It should have been launched with detail. It was meant to have been happening a year later. That time has now come, and so it was already going to happen, and it's clear that the time had come. So in some sense, it's reactive, and in some sense, it's also planned. But I can see how people perceive it as just a pure reaction. We can move into this slowly, and the intention is to move into this slowly and really get people familiar with the concepts and understand them, so that it's not just like being blindsided. I think that with a team like Viadel, like clearly they do have some alpha tokens. Clearly, they also have investors that have invested in this team to make this project work. Right, all of those people are on your team. They can also lock to your owner key. They can also showcase that conviction to the owner. And I think that sorry, I keep on saying video wrong. Am I saying Viadao?
Just video. It's just
Video.
video, as you say, video, but spelled differently.
I know, it's to this day I'm always confused by it. Yeah, video. They have those investors. They have the people that have contributed to the system. They will stake and lock with a team like that. I think that we have to let this play out a little organically.
So am I missing something here then? Can, let's say, still core investors in video, can they contribute their
Yes.
purchase funds to the owner lock?
Yes.
Oh, sorry, I completely missed that. This is why I normally shut up and wait for the code to be on the table. That changes everything.
Yeah.
Okay, so
Exactly.
other people can pledge allegiance to the owner.
Exactly. Yeah. So you really need to be in a situation where none of the investors, none of the stakers, none of the large holders, people like myself, people like Allah, people like Stillcore, people like all of the other institutions in this ecosystem that have large holdings in these subnets. That is a very just we have a very decentralized holder base. All of them have to go, oh yeah, this weird person who just trying to take over this video subnet is the good guy, and we're going to go with him. Like that I think is going to be unlikely, especially if we're talking about bringing this in for like mature, older subnets that are more than a year old. Like we're talking about subnets that have reached this level of distribution in terms of their owner funds, so like their token ownership. And I think that it's very like we can also build this in a way, and we are building this in a way that like this type of attack would take time, right? Like you'd see it coming, and there would be quite a fuss if someone was trying to do this in a very negative way.
Okay, I can do more planning, see how it would affect, but it makes sense. Yeah, it makes sense. Okay, my point. I want to hear Vune's on stage. I want to hear Vune's side. I want to hear Vune say video.
I was gonna pronounce it Video, but I didn't have much to say. I just got
Quebec,
invited up here.
say it with a Quebec or a Canadian French accent, and I'll let you off.
I can't do that well, but it's been commonly said that they sound interesting.
They do.
There's with that heated rivalry, a show coming out. A lot of people making fun of it.
So I'm going to jump off stage because I have a kid to put to bed, so I'll go back to listening mode. Thanks, guys. And thank you, Jake, for having me on stage.
Thanks, Mark. Yeah. Okay. Well, I mean, Vune, you didn't actually have anything to
Yeah,
say.
I don't know.
Yeah.
I'm bullish
I,
on conviction. I think it's a good idea. Delegated conviction is an even better idea. And that's about it.
yeah. That's it. Thanks, Cameron. So jokes aside, Const, no one cares about most of the subnets being shilled. There should be an actual handful of subnets that demonstrate business capacity technically and dollars wise. Yeah. For sure. But I do think that the long tail of Bittensor subnets is super important, and there's always gems down there that are on the way up. Okay, Vune, awesome. Everyone, thank you for coming. It was a great call. Lots of people here. We answered a lot of questions. People were concerned. I knew this was going to be a bit of a hard one to get out, but we're on the right path here, guys, and it's exciting. Like every time we introduce something like this, it's always a Cambrian explosion of innovation in this ecosystem. So we're very excited about this. Okay, more to come. Thanks, everyone. Have a good night.